Welcome back, Sebastian here. So, first video 2025, and I decided that I wanted to start the year with kind of my first kind of real in-depth career video looking at the full F1 career of an F1 driver who I think at this point in time we can fully agree is probably not returning to Formula One anytime soon. So I'm going to do a couple of these because we obviously had quite a few drivers who left the series at the end of 2024. A couple of them, I think there's some question marks about whether or not they might be able to get a full-time seat again in the future. But I think Magnussen's one of the ones who I think we're pretty certain, like I said before, that, he won't be coming back. So taking a look, starting at the very, very beginning of Magnussen's F1 career, all the way back in 2014. He, of course, joined McLaren. He was part of McLaren's kind of young driver program, replacing Sergio Perez after one season at the team. And I believe, for his junior career, not going to talk about that a whole lot today, but I think before doing F1, he did run over 3.5, which was seen as, a very competitive series, maybe not quite as good as GP2 at the time, but still, a pretty good series that was used as a stepping stone for F1. So taking a look at that 2014 season, of course, with McLaren, he finished with 55 points, 11th in the championship. His teammate that year, Jenson Button, finished 8th in the championship, 126 points. So a little bit less than half of his teammates' points. No pole positions, one podium, of course, at his very first race, the 2014 Australian Grand Prix, and of course, no wins that year. When you look at the head-to-head statistics against Button, not fantastic, particularly in the races, but his qualifying stats, I think, were pretty good as a rookie, especially going up a driver who is generally regarded as highly as Button. So in qualifying 9-10, the head-to-head there with a median qualifying delta of 0.039 seconds. So honestly, very, very good season just looking at qualifying. I know in the races, not so good. And the race model score that year was a negative 2.107. So again, not great. I know I've gotten some questions recently about what the race model score is. I'm going to probably make a video over the next month or so kind of giving a more in-depth explanation about what it is and how you can think of it. But basically, it's a standardized way to assess the difference between two teammates over the course of the season. Points, and I think it's a better way than just looking at points, because obviously points are going to depend massively depending on if you're at the front of the grid or if you're at the back of the grid as well. It's also not always the best metric as well. But yeah, not a great season for in the races for Magnussen. Got into a couple of scraps. I remember the Belgian Grand Prix in particular. I've just finished watching the season on F1 TV, but I remember that Grand Prix in particular was not great for Magnussen in terms of wheel-to-wheel incidents, and that was kind of the beginning of his reputation as a very aggressive and punchy driver. For expected points percentage, 55%. And towards the end of the season, again, I didn't watch the season live, but watching through F1 TV, you can tell with the commentary team, Martin Brundle and David Croft, how there was a lot of question marks about McLaren's driver lineup towards the end of the season. There were rumors that Alonso would be joining the team, and it wasn't confirmed which one of Button or Magnussen would be sticking around. Of course, Alonso did officially join the team for 2015 with joining the McLaren Honda project, and of course left McLaren in the position of having to basically choose between Magnussen and Button. Honestly, unfortunately, a very unfortunate situation for Magnussen, kind of similar to the situation Sainz is in this past season at Ferrari, but you're basically a team, like an all-time great driver joining a team, forcing the team to choose one of its two drivers who are both, performing decently well, I would say, and basically both deserved to stick around. But the team decided to go with Button. Unfortunately, and infamously, Ron Dennis called Kevin Magnussen on his birthday to tell him he wouldn't be driving in 2015. Of course, because that decision was so late, it left Magnussen without a seat for 2015. But for Magnussen, he would show up in 2015, if in a very, very small role. 2015, of course, Alonso has his accident in winter testing in Spain. Still kind of a secret of what exactly happened that caused Alonso to have his accident. Of course, kind of the online pet theory that's obviously that floats around quite a bit is that Alonso basically was electrocuted by his own car, but Honda basically won't ever admit that. But if basically Alonso missed the first race of the season, Magnussen came in to replace him. What a great opportunity for Magnussen to show, that he still has it. He deserves to be on the grid. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't even start that first race of the season, as would be the case quite often that year. His engine exploded on the lap to the grid. So for 2015, not classified, and of course, no points. His teammate Button, pretty bad year. Of course, I think that race in Australia didn't finish that race, but over the course of the season, Button would end up 16th in the championship with only 16 points. A very steep fall off from 2014. I could have put the quality head-to-head, didn't really bother. It was basically such a small sample size, and of course no data for the race model or expected points because Magnussen didn't even start that one race. But he would find his way back on the grid for 2016, joining the Renault team, Renault rejoining F1 as a team buying Lotus's entry. And of course, they were going to be a works team. So for Magnussen, not a bad deal coming back into F1 with a works team, and he, of course, joined Jolyon Palmer. Now, that first year, Renault, of course, first year as a works team, and Lotus, of course, struggling a lot with cash, so not a whole lot of development was done on that 2016 car. Magnussen finished with 7 points, 16th in the championship. His teammate Jolyon Palmer, of course, a rookie at the time, finished 18th, 2 places below him with a single point. Qualifying head-to-head a little bit closer than I think Magnussen would have wanted, especially given what would happen to Palmer the following year when his teammate was Hulkenberg. So qualifying head-to-head 11-8 in Magnussen's favor. Median qualifying delta 0.046 seconds, so a little bit less than half a tenth. Race model score 0.819 in Magnussen's favor, so Magnussen clearly the better driver in the races. An expected points percentage, this is kind of an example of why the expected points model is a little bit wonky can be a bit wonky with backmarker teams. Magnussen scored 593% of his expected points. I think he scored 7. He was expected to score about 1.5 or so. Again, heavily benefited from one race, I believe the Russian Grand Prix, where he had 7th place finish there and picking up 6 of those 7 points. Of course, the car was pretty bad, so no poles, no podiums, and no wins. Now, 2017, he moves over to Haas, and this was kind of unfortunate for Magnussen. Probably should have stayed at Renault for another year, given he was better than Palmer, but Renault basically change of leadership. Where have we not heard that before? They basically decide outgoing team principal was Fred Vasseur, who of course is now at Ferrari. He was kind of the one who I think brought Magnussen into the team in the first place, was replaced by Cyril Abiteboul. Decided to go with a change of direction. Of course, brought Nico Hulkenberg in to replace instead of Magnussen, and instead Magnussen decided to join Haas, who in their second year in the series, replacing Esteban Gutierrez, who was basically just a placeholder there for that first year in 2016. So, and of course, Haas would basically be Magnussen's home for the rest of his F1 career. And, when you think of Haas in F1, Magnussen is obviously going to be up there, and, vice versa. When you think of Magnussen, he's mostly going to be associated with his time at the Haas F1 team. But that first year at Haas, 19 points, 14th in the championship. His teammate, of course, was Romain Grosjean. He finished 13th in the championship with 28 points, so lost the head-to-head points battle there. Quality as well, not the better driver of the two. Lost quality head-to-head 8-12, and the median qualifying delta between the two drivers was 0.127 seconds in Grosjean's favor. Again, race model score as well in Grosjean's favor with a negative 0.454 for Magnussen. Expected points, he did actually do pretty well there, above 100%, so he was at 130% there. And of course, Haas that year not particularly strong, a lower midfield team, so no poles, no podiums, and no wins, which is to be expected. So Magnussen stays at the team for 2018, but the car is much better, and Magnussen, as a result, has his best statistical season in F1, just looking at points. So for Magnussen finishes 9th in the championship, which would also be his best result in the championship. 56 points, again, teaming up with Grosjean, who finished 14th in the championship with 37 points. So this is the first year that I think, this Magnussen had a very, very strong season in F1, I would say. 2014 beaten by Button, 2016 better than Palmer, but Palmer rookie and also not a very good driver. 2017 beaten by Grosjean, so this was kind of the first year where I think he was kind of clearly a decent driver, I would say. Surprisingly, I watched 2018 live, and of course we all remember Grosjean crashing out like every other race the first half of the season. Lost in all of that was the fact that Grosjean was actually the better of the two drivers in qualifying. So Grosjean won the teammate head-to-head 12-7, and the median qualifying delta was 0.313 seconds in Grosjean's favor. So that's a bit of a surprise there, doing the research for this video. Race model score is 0.396 in Magnussen's favor, so slightly in Magnussen's favor there, and percentage of expected points, 105%. This year, Haas finished 5th in the championship, so again, Haas's best season in F1, and I think Magnussen had a pretty good year too, pretty consistent, got some pretty good points finishes as well, but not quite able to get on the podium. This was still a time where you basically had the big three of Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, and it was basically impossible for anyone else to get on the podium unless four of those drivers didn't finish the race. So of course, no poles, no podiums, and no wins. Now, moving on to 2019, for Haas, 2019 was a pretty bad year. This was the first year that their tire problems kind of became a big issue, qualifying well and massively sliding down the order. But for Magnussen, he was still able to get some decent points, finished with 20 points, 16th in the championship. His teammate, still Romain Grosjean, finished in 18th place with 8 points. I always thought it was funny that one year, the symmetry between the race numbers 20 and 8, and also was exactly how many points both of those drivers got in the championship that year. For Grosjean, this was the first year he out-qualified, or for Magnussen, this was the first year he out-qualified Grosjean in qualifying, winning the qualifying head-to-head 13-7 with a median qualifying delta of 0.041 seconds. And for race model score, in the positive again, 0.31, and for expected points percentage, 146%, which is pretty good, being above 100%. But again, Haas, pretty bad car, lower midfield, upper back marker, depending on which race it was and depending on how bad their tire wear was. So of course, no poles, no podiums, and no wins. Now, 2020, I think statistically Haas's worst season, and probably competitive with the Renault for probably the worst car that Magnussen's driven. So for Magnussen, 1 championship point, finishes 20th in the championship. His teammate only scores 2 points, and I think one of them scored, I'm trying to just remember off the top of my head, I think Grosjean scored 2 points at Hungary, and Magnussen scored that 1 point in the Eiffel Grand Prix, or vice versa. Maybe it was a couple of 10th place finishes there. But, regardless, pretty bad season for the team, not a whole lot of points being scored. Qualifying, after out-qualifying out-qualifying Grosjean the previous year for the first time, head-to-head qualifying was tied here 7-7 with a median qualifying delta of 3 thousandths of a second. This, of course, was Grosjean's last year. His season obviously ended prematurely with that crash in the Bahrain Grand Prix. So Magnussen was partnered by Pietro Fittipaldi, Haas's reserve driver, for the final 2 races of the season. But of course, it was only 2 races, so I haven't put those stats on the board. For race model score between Magnussen and Grosjean, 0.207 in Magnussen's favor. So the last 3 years that they were together, Magnussen generally had the upper hand in the races. By basically a score of 0.2 to 0.3. Percentage of expected points, again, in the positive 130%. But of course, car was pretty terrible, so no poles, no wins, and no podiums. And of course, this is where Magnussen was unfortunately let go from F1 for a second time. Haas really struggling financially for money, and they decided to sign Mick Schumacher. I think was always intended to be Grosjean's replacement for 2021, but the teams felt they were so strapped for cash that they had to replace Magnussen with Nikita Mazepin, and of course his money from his father and from his Russian sponsors. So Magnussen kind of left out in the cold for 2021. I think he did sports cars that year, and that looked like to be the end of his F1 career. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately for Magnussen, geopolitical events, of course, the war is obviously pretty horrible, but geopolitical events actually went in his favor, with basically Russia deciding to invade Ukraine, and of course the sanctions against the Mazepins, sanctions against Russian businesses, which made it so that Haas basically couldn't receive sponsorship money from Mazepin sponsors. So after winter testing 2022, Mazepin, the first winter test in Barcelona, Haas basically dropped Mazepin, and they basically draft in Kevin Magnussen as a replacement for the season. I think even as a reward, I think he was given a multi-year contract as well, just for showing up on such short notice. Of course, for Magnussen, he had basically been doing none of the neck preparation that many of the F1 drivers, all of the F1 drivers will do in the winter. So again, the expectations were pretty low to start 2022, but turned out to be a pretty good year for Magnussen, compared to his teammate. So taking a look at the 2022 season, finished 13th in the championship, 25 points. Of course, coming back on his return to F1, the 2022 Bahrain Grand Prix with that amazing 5th place finish after basically, very limited winter testing and no neck muscle preparation, which was, very, very impressive. Unfortunately, Haas would get worse over the year, but, I think Magnussen generally had a pretty good year. His teammate, of course, was Mick Schumacher, who he was originally supposed to partner the year before. He scored 12 points and was 16th in the championship. So for Magnussen, just over twice as many points as his teammate. Won the qualifying head-to-head battle 16-6 with a median qualifying delta of 0.263 seconds. And this, I think, is probably the biggest reason why, I know many people defend Mick Schumacher, think he should be in F1. The fact that Kevin Magnussen has his biggest gap over any teammate during his time in F1 was this year against Mick Schumacher, I think should tell you something. Bigger gap than Palmer and Magnussen 2016, bigger gap than basically Grosjean at the end of his career 2019-2020 when, he was a little bit past his peak. And of course, much bigger than, much better gap for Magnussen compared to what would eventually happen the following 2 years against Nico Hülkenberg. That was just something that I thought would be interesting to point out. Race model score as well in Magnussen's favor, 1.113, and percentage of expected points, 178%. So basically, throughout most of his time at Haas, that expected points percentage would be, well over 100. And of course, this was the year he got his one and only career pole position at the 2022 Brazilian Grand Prix. Of course, benefited quite a bit from the circumstances, was one of the only drivers to set a lap out when it was still relatively dry before George Russell crashed, bringing out the red flag and a whole heap more rain with it. But he was there in those circumstances, and he was the one who put the lap in. So, he can only really be commended for that. So, of course, Mick Schumacher dropped from F1 from Haas at the end of 2022, and in comes what would be, Kevin Magnussen's final teammate in F1, Nico Hülkenberg. And this was, I think, unfortunately, the turning point, because of course 2022 Magnussen's reputation in F1 coming back after a year off was at a pretty high point, arguably his all-time highest. That would be during his time in F1. I think unfortunately that reputation would be hurt quite a bit the 2 years that would follow. So first, taking a look at 2023, again, Haas, very similar to 2019, pretty good in qualifying, but struggled a lot in the races. So Magnussen scores 3 points all year, 19th in the championship, while his teammate Hülkenberg 9 points, or 3 times as many points, and finishes in 16th, so 3 places higher. Qualifying, a bit of a struggle as well, out-qualified by his teammate Hülkenberg, with a quality head-to-head being 7-15 in Hülkenberg's favor, with a median qualifying delta of 0.24 seconds. Race model score as well, not great, negative 0.85 for Magnussen and only scoring half of his expected points. So massive drop-off compared to his other years at Haas. And of course, no poles, no podiums, and no wins. 2024, this past season, what would turn out to be his final season at the team. 16 points, finishes 15th in the championship, and of course, notably picked up a race ban at the Italian Grand Prix, and of course was banned for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So I guess, this will be F1 trivia in a couple of years, but whenever they say who was the first driver banned under the penalty point system, the answer, of course, will be Magnussen. His teammate Hulkenberg, 11th in the championship, so 4 places above him with over twice as many points with 41. Cole head-to-head, similar situation in 2023, lost a head-to-head 5-17, and median qualifying delta was 0.23 seconds, so about a hundredth of a second better than 2023. Race model score, quite a bit worse in 2023, a bit of a surprise there, negative 1.703. With expected points, 64%, so slightly better than 2023. Again, Haas, a midfield car, no poles, no podiums, and no wins. And I think this was something that was obviously, definitely going to be, not saying an issue, but something that was, kind of rumbling under the surface all throughout 2024. And I think it really came to the forefront at the 2024 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Was that, Oliver Baumann was likely going to be in one of Haas's seats for 2025. He, of course, came in replacing Sainz at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, scored points, 7th place on his F1 debut. I think really from there, regardless of how things went in Formula 2, it was looking pretty likely that he would be one of Haas's drivers for 2025. And this, of course, put a bit of pressure on Magnussen in terms of the driver market situation. Again, results weren't there, and, with Hulkenberg going off to Audi Sauber, there was an opportunity, I think, for him to stick around, but the team basically opted to sign Esteban Ocon over him, and that basically, in effect, ended his F1 career. I do think, really realistically, after the results last 2 years, whether it's something with the car that he wasn't able to adapt to perfectly or something else, or just kind of natural decline with age, I think, at this point in time, picking Ocon over Magnussen for Haas, I think, was, a realistically, a pretty good decision. So looking at, just finishing up this video, looking at Magnussen's career as a whole, 185 Grand Prix starts, 202 points, 1 pole, no wins, unfortunately for him. That 1 podium, of course, like I said before, memorably coming at his first career Grand Prix. Now, looking at some of the more advanced statistics I like to use, so for expected points, his career expected points, looking at all of his races, was 88%, so a little bit below 100, but of course that's going to be hurt quite a bit by, for example, 2014, which was his rookie season. When you look at that career points expected, that ranks 88%, that ranks 35th out of 79 drivers who are assessed, and 15th out of 32 drivers in the midfield kind of driver class, those who have basically scored enough points or were expected to score enough points that they would fit into that classification. Because kind of like I showed with the Renault year in 2016, basically the worse the car, the higher the variability between, what kind of percentages you can end up with. And of course, the better the car, actually, it kind of dampens the percentages, or at least the absolute range of the percentages quite a bit. So again, that's kind of why I like to split it up into both overall and class kind of ranking. Race model rank 40th out of 77, so slightly below average there. So basically it says that, again, compared to kind of an abstract, like a fictional, perfectly, average F1 driver, he would be, his race model score would be negative 0.172. And for qualifying, ranks 37th out of 77, so a little bit better than average there. And again, against a hypothetical average F1 driver, it would be predicted that a median qualifying gap between them would be 0.087 seconds. So a little bit above average qualifier, a little bit below average in the races. Again, perhaps it would be the other way around in your head as well. But I think for Magnussen, I think he has a very good long F1 career. I think a bit lucky that he was able to come back into F1 after leaving the sport twice. Not many drivers have been able to say that for sure. And yeah, I think, I think he was a really good driver, not a great driver. I never really felt he was a driver who I really wished or felt he should have been, promoted to a kind of a front-running team. But he did his job, was really, really solid. And yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do in his future motorsports endeavors, which, as things stand, I think next year he's planning to drive with BMW in WEC, in the World Endurance Championship. So, that's a pretty good gig, and hopefully he does well for himself there. So anyway, that is my F1 career video of Kevin Magnussen. Thank you so much for watching. If you've gotten all the way to this point at 25 minutes, pretty hefty video there. And yeah, first video of the new year, and real excited to make content for all of you who watch again this year. So like I said, thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.